In this video, I want to talk to you about one of the things that's probably more associated with trauma than anything else, and that is disassociation. Hi, I'm John Hawkins Jr. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and trauma specialist. This is my wife, Bissan Hawkins, who's a life coach, trauma coach, and a spiritual director at our center. Disassociation and trauma are like peanut butter and jelly. You probably aren't going to have one without the other. Disassociation is actually how trauma forms in the first place. When we have energy we can't regulate, or we're powerless, or helplessness, or a deep sense of aloneness with these overwhelming emotions, the brain has this mechanism in the most primitive part of the brain where it's called the thalamus. It's kind of a relay switch for your five senses, so to speak. So as all sight, smell, taste, touch, all that stuff starts coming through, the information and the chemical energy and the signals, if it's too much, it'll damage the upper brain. So that part of the brain will release what's called endogenous or internal natural opiates to block that energy from getting to the upper brain, to protect the brain. So in trauma therapy, it's what we call peri or before, the peri-traumatic disassociation. The degree to which you disassociate going into the trauma will translate to how severe the PTSD is coming out of the trauma. So then what happens is you start to get some association or trigger to the trauma. And then those chemicals, those natural opiates, will start to release, and it's on a continuum. So let's say at first maybe you feel a little numb or spacey, or you're getting tunnel vision, or you can't hear. Then it starts going more and more where you get what's called a derealization, where I don't feel like things are real, like I'm walking around in a dream. Depersonalization, where I don't feel like my body or I'm real. And then it goes, to higher and higher where you're out of the body, like staring, severe childhood, physical abuse, sexual abuse, where a client could say, the 6-year-old me was on the ceiling watching this happen to me, all the way down the line until you get completely fragmented, where I don't even remember the event at all. Or I could remember it, but I don't really feel like it affected me because I don't feel anything. In that case, the person, unless they get really triggered by something that'll flood in, they don't really can think that event affected them, or that they're past it. One of the common things clients will tell me in the early stages of work is, I dealt with that. I've never heard anyone who's sufficiently dealt with it say, I dealt with it. So that's the first cue to me that they haven't. So I'm gonna ask them, well, walk me through that. Tell me how you did that. And usually, again, as they're starting to talk, their skin color might change, or eye moisture, so I know there's still a lot there. They've disassociated from it. Mm-hmm. So disassociation can be comforting to some people because it can get them out of overwhelming feelings. Mm-hmm. It can be scary for some people because they start feeling like they're losing their contact to the present or reality, and they've lost control of it. Then there's different types of disassociation. So in addition to explaining what disassociation is, one of the things I really want to give you guys in this video is how to manage dissociative symptoms, because that can be really disruptive in your day-to-day life. What's not as well known, even a lot of clinicians don't understand this, is disassociation isn't just on that scale of going into like numb, detached, disconnection, but you can disassociate into what's called hyperarousal. So the panic, the flooding, the anxiety, or maybe disassociating to anger and rage. In either case, it's split off stuff from the past that then gets triggered and it floods into your present through implicit memory networks. And I've written and talked ad nauseum about implicit memory. It's the entire ball of wax. So I won't get extensively into that today, but you can go watch a video that we're gonna do completely on the whole video on implicit memory. Because like I said, that's the key to healing and managing all this stuff. So I brought Bissan in today because I want to use some of her personal experience in how to manage some of these, dissociative states. So she's grew up in the Middle East and has experienced all types of trauma across the range of what you could experience. And so she's got a lot of real life experience of how to, regulate these states, manage them, how to cope, what to do when nothing is working and you can't cope, and all this kind of stuff. So that's what makes her a great trauma coach, is she's walks the walk, she's been through it all. And in there's multiple modalities I've trained in my career as a therapist that are excellent and very powerful and healing. EMDR is one, brain spotting, which is an evolution of EMDR, somatic experiencing. My two favorite models are ADP, which stands for Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy, and internal family systems. So probably the bulk of what I do at this point now is the combination of those two models. In every modality, one of the things they teach for trauma clients is what's called grounding techniques. So these are the things like when you're getting those implicit memories activated, you're getting sucked out of the present, the past is like flooding into your present. So they're based around your five senses. So when I was talking about the thalamus getting blocked so that energy doesn't come up, and you're getting sucked away into the past, through those implicit networks. So things like smell, taste, touch, hearing, visual. I've had again early in my career where I've worked at treatment centers where a lot of times people have really severe addictions driven by significant traumas. Sometimes I might have to walk them outside because the sensory stimulus is so much greater than sitting in my office. Whether they hear things, they can feel the heat of the sun, stuff like that. Internal family systems is very unique in a number of ways, but one of the ways is how they view disassociation. They view it as a protective part of the personality, so then you work with that part. You might ask that part if it's willing to step back or what its biggest concern is, why it's numbing you out right now. So, and you have to have access to what they define as core self. And so when you're out in the day-to-day life on the street, sometimes you're just nailed with a trauma part and you're flooded and you really can't get access to self. So I think in that context, having grounding strategies and techniques to survive that moment or that period of time is really essential. So what I want to do with Bissan is have her kind of walk through some of the things that she has found helpful over the years, because her PTSD when we met was so severe. She'd done a lot of personal work on herself, particularly with spirituality, but she never had any trauma therapy or any kind of like scientific approaches to really help with neuroplasticity and rewiring some of how trauma affected the brain and nervous system for her. So she's dealt with the most severe dissociations and floodings. And I don't know, what would you say are some of the things that have been the most useful for you, or we can maybe put them in a context? Or she also coaches a lot of women here in the United States, but also in the Middle East, virtually, that have gone through life experiences such as hers. And so, again, she brings a lot of value to that. What would you say if you were going to talk to somebody watching this video right now? Man, I get it.
Yeah. The first thing I would say, thank you, John. That was great. Thank you for the intro and thank you for everything you have taught me. And I'm gonna tell you the first thing to think about right now is not to think. Isn't it great? So when thoughts come and the dialogue starts in your brain, the triggers and the trauma that I suffered from, especially from man domination in the Middle East, always had a big guard for me that I have to dissociate whatever he's saying and always have my guard up. Because my protector's mission was just to not have the little child in me feel that another man is gonna direct my path or tell me what to do again.
So Bissan, when you were talking about don't think, and you were saying like you would get some of these like a paranoid part of you saying like, oh, you can't trust me, or people are out to get me, that kind of stuff. I wanted to make just a quick example of that some of the understanding comes from internal family systems, where in a very quick way, there's parts of us that have been wounded, that got disassociated. In IFS, they call those exiles. They got sent away so the rest of our system could keep functioning. And then we develop different protective or managing parts to either keep that part from getting triggered and flooding our body with that energy, or from getting re-wounded in the same way and adding to the wound and the pain. And then there's our core self, which again, we'll get into in a different video. So what I heard you saying was, okay, when you're saying don't think, and you can answer this for yourself, is to recognize that is not all of me saying that.
Yeah.
So, one of the realities that we've understood through neuroscience now, neurobiology, is that you have a lot of subparts to your personality. There are different neural networks in the brain, and you can actually see them in fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, in real time. When we shift in and out of different parts, you could be super confident in one part of your personality, And then in a different situation, all of a sudden I feel small and inadequate and anxious. So I think that's a great, and in IFS we call that unblending, when a part is just totally hijacking you and taking you over, and that's all you see yourself as, that you can't see that it's just one part of your personality. So she started to recognize through some of the work that she was doing in her own therapy that that's a part of me that's feeling paranoid or anxious or distrusting. It's not my whole personality. So she was able to start unblending from some of that. And that's a form, even though, again, like I'm saying, it's not a form of numbness or, like going out of the body or getting all spacey and woozy, but it could come in as anger or distrust but in today's video, I really want to help with those kind of things, more of the numbness, the panic. So what we call hyper or hypo. So it's got a lot of activity or low activity with the spacing out numbness. So those are the things that I want you to speak today, in addition to like what you're just starting to talk about now, with the kind of recognizing and doing a little bit of unblending, but also when you're out there and just something floods, like in that situation, what was triggering me. Where other times you're gonna get like flooded with anxiety, panic, rage, and you don't know what's happening. And then I think that's where the grounding stuff with the five senses is super crucial. So could you speak more to that part of it, of like how you were able to start recognizing that's just a protective part of me, not all of me that's feeling that way?
Explain that part, because I used to say I a lot in my life. I am not gonna be a loser. I am not gonna be defeated. So what you taught me through IFS was great, because I recognize that dialogue first of all, and why am I saying I? When it's just a moment. In the moment, it could be a part or a defender or a protector that I have to initiate to begin with, which we talk about a lot with my students, that we created those parts. We needed to. We needed to take that dialogue and affirm that it's mine. And that's the only way I'm gonna protect myself, like you said, from me feeling bad again. Unworthy, unloved, no attention. I struggled a lot with saying I.
So in that moment, so you start to create some awareness, right? Awareness is a step, but I find awareness is not gonna do much without experience. So once you started to become aware, like, oh, this is not all of me. This is a protective part of me that's kind of jumping in right now. What's some of the things that you found most helpful to kind of unblind from that part, so just totally didn't take over and hijack you?
First of all, recognize the I and turn it, and we will work on this. I know we can.
So when you were talking about, you started to recognize, oh, this is not all of me, right? And you started to say, I started to kind of get in touch with that part of me, saying it's just one part amongst many. So I could start to work on unblending from that a little bit. Sometimes parts are willing to do that, sometimes they are not. And sometimes you're gonna have to ride it out. And as helpful as all these things are, I mean, we were talking about that not too long ago, where I think it's important to validate. Sometimes in a moment, nothing works and you're just hijacked. And you're just at the mercy of riding it out till it ends, and not to feel shame about that. Because with trauma, especially childhood abuse, things like that, it's so easy to go into this like shame spiral. And so, oh, I tried, it didn't work. Clients will come back in and they'll feel bad. And I'm like, look, we're just working on this. You're doing the best you can. And sometimes you're just gonna get hijacked. It's like, I wish it was otherwise, but I don't want you to feel shame about that. You're just working on this. You're working to build a relationship with some of these parts of you. So when you're in that moment, I started to get the awareness, and I'm like, okay, this is a part of me that's coming in right now. I'm dissociating into this part. What are some of the things that you felt were useful or helpful in like unblending, getting out of that, getting the intensity to come down? Sometimes just the unblending itself will bring down the intensity. Or you recognize the part will start to communicate with you and let you know. And again, I know some of these concepts may be a big jump for this video, but there are other videos we'll explain IFS in real detail. But in those moments, what were some of the things you felt like, okay, that really started to help me get out of those states?
It's hard for me to explain right now because I'm not in the situation, but the first thing that I recognize that worked for me and might work for you is, how can I focus on how I feel? If this is the feeling, and where is it in my body? Because sometimes I felt it's in my throat and it was just like kind of comforting my part or the throat is touching it and say, what is this for us? Like, what is this meaning for me right now? Why am I choking, or why am I not able to breathe or talk things out? And if I'm driving, of course, it's difficult. So now you need to probably use music to distract kind of like the flood that you're going through. But I consistently, and I told my students, and you could try it and see if it works for you, is like, can you hold a sensation? Sometimes it's in your abdominal. Like if I'm afraid, I had an accident in 2011, and that trauma keeps like making me watch every moment of every car. So if I want to feel that stress, how can I take myself from I'm in danger, this is going to happen to me, to I am safe? So I put a distraction to get me the senses that I'm in the now. It's not in the past where this is
Yeah, and
happen.
I think that's a good example of when I was saying there's the grounding strategies, and then there's kind of working with that part or that network, that neural network.
Yeah.
So let's say in a situation like that, there's a part of the brain. So all that firing is really coming from a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is Latin for almond because it looks like an almond. So, and but that's our brain's threat detector. So I mean, it reacts like even if the thing with trauma is there could be no threat in your current environment, but if there's any association, no matter how remote, it's going to trigger it like it's happening right now. So, and that's that hyper arousal flooding, that other end of the dissociative scale where it's intensity versus numbness. So there, that part of the brain, the insula, is how we recognize our body and what we're experiencing in our body. That part of the brain actually has capacity to start to calm the amygdala down some.
Right.
When you're up in the prefrontal cortex and you're thinking and talking, that'll crank the amygdala up a lot higher. So what you were talking about doing there was, okay, first I started to recognize I'm feeling this in my body here. And if I can just be with that body sensation and be open to understanding it, that can create some unblending, some calming. Other times maybe you're in a situation like you mentioned, I'm driving or something like that where it's also associated with another physical trauma I went through. So then I'm using grounding things like music or smell. You pull like perfume or a fragrant thing out of your purse in that case and smell it, or like open the windows at the tactile sensation of the wind hitting my face. So it's a bit like an MMA fight.
Yeah.
You're not just one type of martial art. You're just anything that works in a street fight. Whatever works is what works. So don't let somebody tell you got to do it a certain way. It's just go with what works. So that's a good example of how to blend working with parts and just physical grounding strategies. But I want to get some feedback from you, again, because you had decades worth of experience in this, is the grounding strategies are based around your 5 senses. Sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing. So what I want to do is give an example of each, whether it was from your personal life or from women and men that you've coached with trauma, of some things that you found useful over the years, and we could just list them off, I guess, one. So what would be a visual one that you found that was
Start
helpful
looking at nature for me. Start looking at anything outside, window. Like, don't get in a room and melt yourself in a hole. Walk yourself outside and start recognizing birds. You could do sounds and sight at the same time. Breathing helped me a lot. Just taking deep breaths and just focusing on tree or bird.
Yeah, and I think that's good because what I'll notice, especially in sessions with people, is when they're getting activated, a lot of times they'll start to shut their eyes. It's the worst possible thing you can do because you're going to get sucked into the past. And I know it's unintentional for clients, and it's hard. I'll be really continue to open your eyes, look at me. I'm right here with you. And they're still having a hard time opening their eyes. But I think that's a key point that you hit on too, is when you can stack senses. I go out, I hear the birds, I see the trees,
smell,
take a breath, I bring it in, there's smell, so now you get 3 senses right there. And so
water.
that's going to be as 5 with taste and tactile touch. So if you can get all 5, your chances of grounding are much better. So there's an example, like you said, where you stacked a bunch of them. What about some auditory ones that you found useful over the years?
Either you hum to yourself, listen maybe to birds if you don't have your headset, or just put whatever music calms you down. I don't recommend sad music because it's just going to flood you more. I always say, where's your happy place? Where's your happy place? I tell my Because we were kids, we all have a happy place. Where's your happy place? Oh, visualizing that I'm on the ocean. Oh, good. Can you get to Mother Nature and just feel it?
Yeah, I think, and it's very individualized, that kind of thing. One thing, I'm glad you said happy. That can still be triggering for people. The one word I try to stay away from is safe.
Yeah.
Because safe, that word can be a massive trigger for people because they never had safety.
Safety, yeah.
Some individuals have never had internal safety or external safety their entire life.
Yeah.
So that can be a hugely triggering word because then all of a sudden it starts making them feel sad that it never felt safe.
Yeah, never been.
So then you want to individualize that to yourself, whether it's happy, whether it's calm, whether I feel a place where I feel good, you know, like free, whatever that is for that specific person. So for you, it was happy.
Yeah.
What are maybe some touch things?
I sometimes if I'm like in a place, I will touch myself or in the car or the steering wheel or my even fabric. But if you're out, I always touch the trees, the leaves, the flowers, the grass.
Again, you can stack, right? If I'm crunching them up, I'm getting auditory, smell, right?
Yeah.
So I'm hoping you're getting a sense of like these things can be very simplistic, but very effective. So they're not rocket science. But in scent is one of our most primitive senses. So there is some studies that have shown scent can actually make it through the thalamus when it floods with the opiates. So scent can be very grounding. I've had clients when I explain this to them, they're like, oh, I remember one woman time, she goes, wow, she pulls in her purse this little fragrant bar of soap. She goes, ever since I've been like a teenager, I've carried this soap and I didn't realize what I'm doing, but if I have a job interview, if I get nervous, I just smell this. I used to have clients put on essential oils if we were doing a processing session, things like that, so they could really stay grounded. All these things can still be hugely useful. When we first got together and started to recognize how severe her disassociation was at times, where she could go to the point where she wouldn't remember who I am, herself, that she had kids. And so then as she would start to slip into that, I would grab her. A lot of that would happen at nighttime because that's where a lot of the trauma occurred. So then I would grab her. We had this huge bathroom and I would flip all the lights on, have her look at herself in the mirror. So we're getting the visual. I start playing videos of the kids, you know, and she's just like fighting to get back, and we would just do that until we could get her grounded. So like I said, she knows what it's like to deal with the most severe dissociative experiences and symptoms, and that's why I really wanted her to speak to some of that in this video. Anything else you would add on that?
Patience, please. Patience and patience and patience. I mean, I understand it's been so long that nobody paid attention to you, and now you're paying attention to you, and I know how triggering this could be. Like, how could I? Like, a lot of my students just start blaming, don't blame. Like, how could I let this happen for so long? I'm ashamed of it. Don't get in that hole again. Dance, listen, go out, get yourself out of it, breathe. The breathing meditation helps, even without music. Just breathing and focusing on the breath helps a lot, and it's a practice.
There's an explosion in our pop culture around breath work and all these kind of things, and these things can be extremely useful. You want to do those with somebody who's got awareness and understanding of trauma, because sometimes you could, just like meditation, you could get activated. Some of my clients, it's too much. It creates too much of a space for if they do meditation, they've got a ton of trauma where all that trauma can intrude. But things that integrate movement, that's why there's so much research on trauma and yoga. So it creates a container, yoga, because you're moving the body, that insula is going, you know, and then
energy's flowing.
Your energy's flowing, but you're doing the breath with the mindfulness, with movement. So then it creates a container for a lot of the trauma, and it's actually reworking parts of the brain that get damaged in childhood and developmental traumas. But I think the one of the key points that you just hit on is self-compassion.
Very much.
Is really, because it's so hard when you've gone through a lot of childhood abuse and, you know, like I said, developmental traumas, because there's so much internalized shame. And so it's so challenging. Then you'll be shaming yourself about the fact that I can't be self-compassionate. Just continue to be compassionate to yourself. Like, you know, people say, I don't know why I didn't do this earlier. I'm like, well, you didn't have the resources, the time, you're in survival mode, you didn't have external safety, maybe you're in an abusive relationship or toxic work environment. So just continuing to be compassionate, you know, like, I'm doing the best I can with this. And just like we were saying earlier, sometimes nothing is going to work in that moment and you're just hanging on and riding it out. That is not a failure on your part. That is just the reality. I wish it was different, but sometimes you just, and you know, like, because I used to hear you talk a lot about that, where I know at some point I'm getting out. You know, like, okay, it might take her days or a week, but she's like, at some point I'm out.
Say, let's take a break and sleep and wake up better.
Because there's
Which
also,
helps.
there's times where sleep is a form of disassociation. I might have somebody get their trauma triggered and then they go sleep for 12, 15 hours.
Yeah.
We're not talking about that kind of sleep.
No.
But what we're saying is the systems we're using in therapy really are working in essence with a lot of the REM sleep systems. It's a lot of times when you can just go like, okay, some days the dragon wins. It's not a failure on my part. Let me go get a good night's sleep. And then while you're sleeping, that system is processing things and you could wake up and be in somewhat different of a state, you know?
True.
If you would like more information about trauma and disassociation or understanding of some of these things or how to work with some of your parts, contact us anytime at hawkinscounselingcenter.com. We'd be more than happy to, either one of us, you know, connect with you or set up a time to, you know, meet with you and see how we can help you there. Thanks for taking the time for me this far to watch the video. And we have more videos to come. Like I said, we'll get, definitely want to do a really good one on internal family systems after some of the stuff we were talking about, because they have a very unique way of working with disassociation, whether it's the hyper or the hypoarousal.
Thank you. That was awesome.